This story happened to me during July, and I'm honestly still shaken by it. I live in an extremely decent neighborhood. Neighbors are always quiet and friendly, and nothing ever happens around here. Or so I thought. I'm a 17-year-old female, and I live more in the countryside of Pennsylvania, so my house is relatively isolated. A few neighbors behind us, though. This is important later. It's summer vacation, and my sleep schedule is, of course, back to the sleep at 4 a.m. and wake up at 2 p.m. schedule, and I happened to fall asleep in the living room the previous night. I woke up at 1:14 p.m. to the doorbell ringing, which isn't surprising, because I knew my stepdad was coming over that day, even though he usually comes at around 3 p.m. I just figured he'd come early, because, well, sometimes he did. So in my half-asleep state, I peek through the door and see a man figure standing there. Mind you, I am still half asleep, and my vision is blurry. So I cracked the door for him to come in, and was about to go lie back down on the couch until my mom came up from the basement calling my name. "That's not Sean," my stepdad. Confused, I went back to the door to see who it actually was. The problem was, no one was there. No one was outside, no car, nothing. I just opened the door to a complete stranger and walked away like it was nothing. In the span of 10 seconds of walking away and coming back, the person was gone. For a few days this story messed with my head. I am a strong believer in ghosts, so I started overthinking every night and freaking myself out. What if he comes back? Who was it? Was it a real person? Sounds crazy, I know, but it unfortunately doesn't end there. The next week, someone started a local stack of hay in a field on fire, which is extremely unusual, because hay has been put there for years. And just after that, on the same street, another stack of hay had been lit on fire. Now, I don't mean 3 haystacks. I mean they were really big haystacks, really high up, and really wide. We started smelling a foul smoke, and outside was extremely smoky. And not long ago, my local police department released that there had been 3 daylight burglaries within the span of a week. The houses being typically hidden from view. As I mentioned my house is before. I've come to the conclusion that the man at my door that day was the burglar. And once he saw that someone was home at 1 p.m., he got scared and ran to the back of my house. It's the only rational explanation if it was indeed him, because we would have seen him out front. Is he the one who also started the fires? There's a $10,000 reward for any information on the fires, and I just hope whoever did this gets caught really soon. My neighborhood is in distress, and it's hard to go outside at night anymore, since there's so much land, and it gets pitch black out here. After hearing all this would explain all the strange noises I'd hear through the night. People talking, lights resembling flashlights. Stuff like that in reality is not uncommon, but strange for my neighborhood. Aside from the fire, the most recent thing in this township is a school being broken into and 3 motorcycles stolen. This is getting seriously strange, but unfortunately, or fortunately, it kind of ends there. For now. I don't have any updates just yet, but I still overthink this whole situation. What if he would have just come into my house had I just turned around and laid back down to sleep? I opened the door to a complete stranger, thinking it was my stepdad, after barely getting a glimpse of the person. What if his, or their, next motive is to set houses on fire? What if these crimes are linked? I don't know, but I definitely don't sleep the same at night anymore. At the time of this story, I was a third-year college student. I spent the majority of the summer at my dad's house in California, and it was time for me to go back to school in Arizona. Since I was a third-year university student, I opted to move out of the dorms and live on my own. It was the first time I wasn't going to live with any roommates. It all started the day after I moved into my new place. When it was time for me to go back to college, my friend, Mary, offered to drive me from my dad's California house to my new apartment in Arizona, a 9-hour trip. She said she wanted to help me get moved into my new place. She was waiting to go back to school as well, so she had the time to do it. I was happy to have her along. The drive was a painless one. When we arrived at the apartment, it was still daylight. My new place was an 11-story high-rise building, designed in Art Deco style. It was built in the 1930s. I've only been inside it once. That was back when I toured it. We brought our suitcases inside, rode the elevator to the 9th floor, my level, and started unpacking our bags. We did this until nightfall. When it was time for the two of us to get some sleep, I unpacked my sheets and fitted them onto my new mattress. Mary unpacked a sleeping bag. I told her that she was more than welcome to share the bed with me, but she opted for the couch. It didn't take her more than 10 to 15 minutes to fall asleep. After Mary fell asleep, things got weird. At about 2 a.m., I decided it was time to get some sleep. After I turned off the lights, I rolled onto my back and closed my eyes. I wasn't able to rest very long though, as I felt somebody firmly grabbing my foot. When I tried to pull it away, someone forcefully yanked me towards the edge of the bed. If I had to guess, I'd say I was dragged forward about half a foot. I was startled, and I immediately sat up and turned on the lights. There was no one in my room though. I know Mary hadn't done it. Given her small frame, it couldn't have been her. "Mary!" I shouted. I jumped out of bed and sprinted into the living room, tripping over the sheets that I'd kicked onto the floor. "Mary, wake up!" I nudged her shoulder. "Were you in my room?" I asked, nudging her shoulder again. She started to slowly wake up. I think someone's in the apartment," I stammered. When she heard what I said, she bounded off of the couch and into my bedroom. We searched all of the rooms, under the beds, in the closets, behind the couches, only we didn't find anyone. Mary was slightly annoyed. She suggested that I had dreamt the whole thing. She then offered to take the bed and give me the couch. I declined, and despite Mary's teasing, I returned to my bedroom and slept with the lights on. A few days later, Mary's grandfather suffered a nearly fatal stroke. The very next day, she went back to California to spend time with him. It was all very sudden, and I was left alone. After Mary had left Arizona, things got weirder. My neighbor couldn't care for his cat, and as soon as I showed the slightest interest in adopting it, he put it in a cage and left it on my doorstep. When I tried to give it back, my neighbor wouldn't take it. "The cat's your problem now," he said. It was a well-tempered cat, and I didn't want to see it go to the animal shelter, so I kept it. Almost immediately, I noticed that there was something strange about the cat. Occasionally, I would come home to find the cat sitting in my bedroom and gazing off into space. I'd call its name, but oftentimes it wouldn't respond. When it did this, it would remain transfixed, its body rigid and unmoving, gawking at absolutely nothing. It would do this at least every other day. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. I thought, it's just surveying its new surroundings. But the cat didn't stop doing it. Instead, it started meowing at the walls, sometimes even yowling at nothing. A couple of times, I caught it standing on its hind legs and pawing at the air. Initially, I thought nothing of it. It was kind of creepy, but I couldn't do anything about it. What's interesting is that it never behaved that way in any other rooms. It only did this in my bedroom. This brings me to the next incident. It was a very, very late night, probably 3 a.m., and I had just gotten into my bed. I didn't own an alarm clock at the time, so I often used my cell phone as one. While setting my alarm, I felt something hop onto the edge of my bed. Once again, it was right by my feet. Probably the cat, I assumed. "What are you doing here?" I asked. It wasn't often that the cat crawled in bed with me. When my neighbor had the cat, he never allowed it to be in the bed with him. When the cat would try to climb onto the bed, he would punish it. I tried multiple times to sweet-talk the cat into coming onto my bed, but it never seemed to work. Without looking up from my phone, I called out, "Come here, come sleep with me," and patted my pillows. But the cat didn't move. As cats often do, it started needling at my legs. I played with my phone for a few more minutes, and then I leaned over to place it on its charger. When I went to grab it, though, I just about lost my shit. Looking up at me from the floor was my cat. If my cat was on the ground, then what was in bed with me? I froze. I didn't know what to do. I knew for a fact that someone was in my bed with me. They were touching my legs and feet. Without thinking, I jerked my legs away and quickly turned on the lights. Again, there was no one there. Without hesitation, I started searching for my unwanted guest. This time, I checked all of the unconventional places, behind the washer and dryer, behind the refrigerator, etc. Again, I don't find anyone. At this point, I start to entertain the possibility of something paranormal. I slept with all my lights on, again. I didn't know what to do about the strange happenings. I'd signed a lease that I couldn't get out of, at least not for a few months. I decided to stick it out. I didn't have any other choice. Luckily, the next couple of weeks were quiet ones. That is, with the exception of the cat's behavior. When I was beginning to think that everything was going to be fine and that my unwelcome guest had left, something else happened. Again, it was late, probably around 2 a.m. I was sitting in my living room on the couch. My laptop was sitting on the coffee table in front of me. When I reached over to shut down the computer, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was a large, eerie-looking figure, and it was standing in the doorway of my bedroom. It didn't have any identifiable features. It was tall, distinctly male. I could tell by the shape of its body. Though I couldn't make out its face, I could see that it was looking directly at me. I didn't want it to get away, so I turned to face it. I was going to run after it. As soon as I started to get off my couch, it gripped the doorframe much like a shadow and slinked back into my bedroom. By that time, I'd been able to get a fairly good look at it. It was sinister looking, its body semi-transparent. It made me sick. I was able to look through its torso and see into my bedroom. It literally and figuratively looked like a shadow man. I chased after it, but by the time I made it into the other room, it had disappeared. That must have been what crawled in bed with me, I thought. I felt sick. I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in my bedroom, not after that shadow creature had skulked in there, so I spent the night at my favorite all-nighter coffee shop. Over a few shots of espresso and some day-old cookies, I tried to make sense of what had happened. It wasn't something I saw out of the corner of my eye, I thought. I looked directly at it, and it looked straight at me. That must have been what was disturbing my cat. I just knew it. That night, I called Mary to tell her about what had happened. She suggested that I smudge the place. Smudging is the practice of burning sage. Smudging is used to purify people and places. I did it, but it didn't help. After I smudged the apartment, I was dragged out of my bed the very next day. Needless to say, I moved out as soon as my lease was up. Since moving out, I have yet to come in contact with the Shadow Man. Also, my cat's behavior has drastically improved. I'm a 20-year-old now, and I still think about how my life could have ended by a happy winter day. In February 2003, I was with my parents at their friend's house. My dad and I would often go for snowmobile rides in the woods. I used to bring a couple of friends with me when I would snowmobile in the fields around my area. One day, I was with my dad and two of my friends. We were all 6 and 7 years old and ready for an amazing sled ride behind a snowmobile. We went all around the field multiple times before noon, when the sun was still not making a lot of heat in that cold of winter. Some people may know how the winter is in the province of Quebec, Canada. Cold, snowy, but magnificent. So in the afternoon, the temperature went up a couple of degrees, and we went back to our snowmobile and sled rides. After a while of passing near the house, I shouted to my dad that the snow was softer where we spent most of the time riding. My father didn't give it much thought, since it's a flat field, with the only exception being a 12-foot deep trench that went from the back of the field to the front. Maybe an hour later, my dad decides to make one last run around the field before packing up our things and get home. When we reached the part of the field that I told him the snow felt softer, the snow gave way into the trench. Since it was a really snowy winter, we had multiple storms that added an extra 6 feet to the height of the field. I slid down the hole and fell into 2 feet deep of freezing cold water at the bottom of the 20-foot hole. My dad immediately ran to the side of the hole before backing up and saving himself from falling in too. He yelled at me to stay calm and to try to get out of the water as much as possible. Scared 7-year-old me started to climb up the snow, but only managed to make even more snow fall into the hole. After falling in the water again, I lost my mittens and a boot. At this point, I start crying. I was scared, cold, and angry at my dad for letting me down here. Getting from one end of the field to the other with that old snowmobile took about 3 or 4 minutes. The more time that passed, the more snow that was falling on me. The more snow, the harder it was to stay up. I was a pretty small kid back then, so the water was pretty high for me. I grew tired rather quickly, trying to fight the cold and the snow. In a last attempt to heat myself, I pissed myself. Not proud, but that made me feel safe for a few seconds. I was screaming for help in the most scared voice I ever did. I felt my energy get low pretty fast and almost fell unconscious. As I was about to give in to the cold, I heard my dad's snowmobile coming pretty fast. I screamed out for my dad with all the forces that were left in me. My dad called back to me, ran over to the hole, and threw a rope at me. He finally got me out of there. He squeezed me tightly in his arms and got me back to his friend's house. Once inside the house, my dad took all my clothes off and put me in a hot bath, where I then lost consciousness. I woke up in a hospital bed the day after and saw my parents in tears by the bed. I asked them why they were sad, and they jumped up and started kissing my cheeks and forehead. Be careful when it comes to any kind of sport or outside activity in winter, because the fear of hurting yourself is not the worst. It's the risk of getting hypothermia that might get you if you're not careful. I was in college and I needed a job. My ex-husband and I had worked at a gas station previously, and I was good at the work, so I applied for an opening and was hired immediately. They chose to put me on overnight, and being a 5'3" female and of very little athleticism, I was worried. But I had worked overnights before, and that gave me some confidence. It was a Tuesday night. I was nervous to work because a girl had been kidnapped and was missing from my area. About 1 a.m., a young kid came in and said to me, "I can't find the button to open my fuel door on my car. Can you come help me?" I want to point out here that I am the nicest person around. I let a homeless kid stay at my place once, and he stole my can opener, but I still gave him $20 to get food. I went outside, and he said that he thought the button was inside his car. Like down there. He pointed inside his car and opened the door so that I would have to lean inside. I did, like an idiot. I couldn't find anything because it was really dark inside the car. I got out and asked him what kind of car it was and told him that I would Google it on my phone to figure out where the fuel door was. He said that it was a Honda Mazda. As soon as he said that, my blood ran cold. My dad is a mechanic, and I know for a fact that Honda and Mazdas are two different types of cars. I was about to panic when I heard the voice of my regular shout, "Hey, what are you doing?" I yelled to him that I was going to help this kid find his fuel door. My regulars are pilots at JBLM, and I was so relieved. They said no, go inside and that they will help him find the door. I went back inside, and when they came in, they told me something terrifying. He told me that each time I had leaned into the car, the kid would get behind me and slowly shut the door like he was going to push me in and take off. I am so thankful and extremely lucky that my regular knew what was going on. This happened when I was about 6 or 7 years old, back in the early 60s. We lived in an average 1960 ranch-style house in Seal Beach, California. We lived there about a year before I first saw the shadow people. The fireplace stood in the middle of the entryway. To the left of the front door was the spacious living room, and off to the right was a long hallway which led to the bedrooms. My room was at the end of the hallway, to the right of my parents' bedroom, which was at the very end of the hallway. During the first year we were in the house, I sometimes saw black shadowy figures moving fast just out of the corner of my eye. Being only 6 years old at the time, I didn't know what they were, and dismissed them. I always had a creepy feeling in that house. It never felt cozy or welcoming to me. It was always cool and drafty. It was just a house that we lived in, not feeling much like a home. One Saturday morning, I woke up very early, about 5 a.m. The house was still mostly dark, but light enough to make out where everything was. My usual routine on those occasions when I woke up early was to get out of bed and go to my parents' room, crawl into bed between them, and go back to sleep. I walked to their door in a sleepy daze and turned the doorknob, but it didn't budge. Not only was the door closed, which was unusual, but it was locked. Something made me turn around and look down the hallway. Maybe I heard a noise or something. I don't remember what caught my attention. My eyes strained to see clearly down the hall, past the fireplace and into the living room to see the source of the noise. I saw half of the fireplace, and then past it, the couch in front of the living room window, and then a black silhouette of a head slowly move out from behind the fireplace to peek at me. The silhouette was about 4 feet high, and looked directly at me. It was all black like a void. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was watching me. I stood paralyzed with fear and stared at it for about 5 seconds, trying to adjust my eyes to make sure what I was seeing. At the time, I didn't know who or what it was. Then I bolted back into my room, jumped into my bed and completely covered myself with my blankets, hoping it wouldn't come for me. After waiting for what seemed like many hours, I uncovered my face and saw that it was safe. It had gotten lighter in the house, but it was still early. I didn't dare get out of my bed, so I sat up, got my deck of cards and dolls from my nightstand, and began to play and pass the time until it was time for everyone to wake up. My family and I never closed our bedroom doors when we slept, so it didn't dawn on me to close my door. I felt prickles down my spine, like I was being watched, so I slowly turned to look through the doorway and saw the black silhouette peeking at me again from behind the door jamb. It couldn't have been more than 10 feet from me. I quickly covered myself again and stayed there until my mother came to wake me up for breakfast. I didn't talk about what I saw to my family. My mother didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural, and I didn't think the rest of my family would be interested and would dismiss it, so I kept it to myself. A few days went by without any sightings. One stormy night, the crack of thunder and lightning woke me up. I lay in my bed with the blankets up to my neck, ready to cover my head. I looked around my room, which was lit by a nightlight. Then suddenly, 2 black humanoid silhouettes appeared. They stood still next to each other, on the right side of my bed. The taller one was about 4 feet high, and to its left stood a much smaller one. There weren't any distinguishing features, which made them more frightening. The taller one held in its hand what looked to be the silhouette of a large knife. They both stood over me. I saw the taller one raise the knife high above its head as if it was going to slam it right down into me. I was paralyzed with fear. All I could do was helplessly watch them. Somehow, my body released itself from my entranced state, and I gripped my blankets tight over my face. The emotionless shadows were so real and vivid. I closed my eyes tight, trembling in anticipation to be plunged with the knife. But all was quiet. I must have fallen asleep. Before I know it, it was morning. All was normal in my room. I did tell my parents what had happened, and of course, like I expected, they dismissed it. They said, "That's from watching too many scary shows with your brother." They tried to assure me that it was just my imagination. I knew what I saw. It wasn't my imagination. Why would I imagine something so horrible? From then on, I asked if I could sleep with them, and of course, they couldn't say no to their little princess. Another incident in that house happened when my dad was either working at night or out of town. All I know is he was gone, and left my mom, my brother, and I at home. I slept in my parents' bed next to my mother. I woke up when she got up in the middle of the night to go into the kitchen to get a drink of water, or maybe a snack. The bedroom door was open, and the hall light was on, but the master bedroom where we slept was still dark. I looked at the doorway and saw the two little shadow people, the same ones that appeared to stab me the other night, standing next to each other in the doorway, the same way they did when they stood next to my bed. They just stood there looking at me. I wondered what they wanted and why they were there. I again hid under my blankets. Then, my mom came back in the room and got back in bed as if there was nothing there. A few months later, my dad got a different job and we moved from the house. After we settled in the new house, which did feel like a home, I asked my parents and brother if they had seen the shadow figures in the Seal Beach house. They said they hadn't. So why me? Why that house? I don't know why I was the only one to see them. I'll never know what happened in that house before we moved in, or why the shadow people were drawn there. I do believe in ghosts and shadow people, because I saw them, but I try not to dwell on it, in fear that in doing so, might create the energy that they need to come into our lives. To this day, I hate hallways, and still have to sleep with a nightlight. I'm a 27-year-old male, and I live in a dangerous city in California. I needed to get money from an ATM a few blocks away from my house because it was 1 a.m. and I needed to pay my rent the next day. There is always homeless and thug-looking characters everywhere, all hours of the day and night, so I am used to it, and didn't get nervous about seeing 2 men in dark clothing wandering around the shopping complex. I pulled out $550 and put it in my pocket and waited for my receipt when I feel an arm wrap around my neck, getting me into a headlock. My immediate reaction is, this is not a funny prank, but I knew that it wasn't a joke immediately after I thought that. They are both black guys, and this one puts me in a headlock and starts poking a knife into my spine and whispers into my ear, "Don't be stupid, just be cool and we won't hurt you." While the other guy steps in front of me and starts shoving his hands in all of my pockets. I have 2 children, ages 2 and 3, and I need this rent money or we will all become homeless, but I know they won't care to listen to my sob story. He takes my phone and cigarettes, searches through my wallet, which has $30 in it, and takes it out, and then puts my wallet back. I'm hoping that he thinks that's all the money I have, and will leave me alone now. But he begins to reach his hand into my pocket with the $550 in it. I'm panicking, and need to come up with a way to escape, and I'm frantically trying to think of a solution. I think very well under pressure, and just then, I feel the man's arm loosen his grip in my headlock, and I take that opportunity to spin and step away as quickly as humanly possible. As I'm turning, I see that he's startled from my unexpected maneuver, and he quickly tries to lunge towards me, and his huge hunting knife swings upward from his side like he's going to uppercut the blade into my stomach. It barely misses me, and the blade literally goes up my shirt from underneath and rips it wide open as I'm falling backwards onto my butt and hands. I spring up faster than the speed of light, onto my feet, and start running for it toward a neighborhood of houses. I smoke cigarettes, so usually running across the street has me gasping for air, but because of the adrenaline, I felt nothing. And I used to run track in high school, so I know I'm still able to run really fast if I want to. I'm making good distance away from them, so I come up with the idea to run through everyone's front lawn close to their front doors, so I can punch or pound on each door as hard as I can and try and alert somebody. I'm only able to pound on each door one time, so I don't slow down too much for them to catch up. I look behind me after running past and pounding on 4 doors, and sure enough they are trailing pretty close behind still. I'm confident that I will escape no matter what. My boys need their father to make it home, and no pieces of shit are gonna deprive them of that. I'm panicking slightly, but the feeling of determination outweighs my fears of dying or being hurt. I suddenly realize I'm a block away from the highway patrol station in my town, so I book it in that direction. The distance between me and the thugs is growing more and more, until I make it to the station front doors and look down the street to see the men running in the opposite direction. Fucking cowards. I then tell the highway patrol, who tell the police. They didn't even take a statement from me, or act like they were going to try and catch them at all. But I just want to get home. They drive me home, and the next day I called the police station to see if they found the guys. They did end up finding them, but by the time they did, the guys had nothing illegal on them, so they couldn't do anything. I asked the police if they retrieved my $30 from the guys, but the police said that they can't just take $30 from 2 random guys just because they're black. They could have been any random guys. So essentially, they got off scot-free, and I just learned a valuable lesson about not walking around late at night. Especially not to an ATM at 1 in the damn morning. This event took place on the 25th of July, 2016. I remember this specific day because it was the same day my girlfriend of 10.5 months had broken up with me for unrelated reasons. I was on vacation with my family, mom, dad, little sister, grandma, and grandpa, and my best friend, in Panama City, Florida. When this happened, my grandpa, dad, mom, and sister were down at the pool, while my best friend and my grandma and I were up in our condo on the 7th floor of our hotel. Everyone was resting, and I was planning on laying around and moping all day because of my, now ex-girlfriend. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, and I, out of boredom, stood up and opened it. I figured that it was my dad, but I decided to check through the people just to be sure. When I checked, I noticed my dad standing close to the door with his phone out. Side note, the door locks from the outside when you close it. I didn't really think much of it until I looked behind my dad and see a man walking around behind him, but he wasn't facing my dad or anything, so I figured he was drunk and harmless, because where I'm from there are drunk people outside often. I opened the door kind of slowly, and suddenly the man that was behind my dad had his hands on the door and he was trying to get inside. My dad got inside quickly and began kicking the man's hands and cussing at him to get out. Although my dad is strong, the man was much stronger and ended up barging in. The man was tall, around 6'6", and looked completely built out of muscle. Obviously, I freaked out, and just as my grandma was coming out of the bedroom asking what was going on, I stuttered a quick response and then ran into the bathroom. But only one door on the bathroom locked, so I quickly, and anxiously, ran across the hallway and into the main bedroom which my grandparents were using. I locked the door quickly behind me, and I could hear my dad and grandma yelling at the man to get out. I peeked out the door twice. The first time I peeked out, I saw the muscular man was completely blocking the door. The second time I peeked out, just so happened to be at the same time my best friend was peeking out of the bathroom door. I quickly motioned to her, we're both girls, and she also ran across the hallway and into the main bedroom. When we had locked the door behind us again, we hugged, and then she told me that the man was saying that he was with the police and the cartel were outside waiting, and if we went outside we were going to get hurt. Keep in mind, this man was in swim trunks and no shirt. For some crazy reason, my best friend believed the man, and although this was a terrifying situation, it still made me chuckle a little bit and brought some light to the situation. Isn't that what best friends are for? My best friend and I continued standing in the middle of the bedroom, hugging and trying to calm down. We were taking deep breaths when suddenly there was a loud, and I mean loud, bang on the door of the main bedroom. Without even thinking, my best friend and I ran out onto the back patio. The patio had 2 doors, one that was connected to the main bedroom, and one on the other side of the patio that was connected to the living room. So we ran out of the main bedroom and onto the patio, and went into the living room through the patio doors before running outside the condo. When we got outside the condo, we saw my dad and grandma, both who had thought that we left the condo when the man came in. My grandma then explained that my dad was able to push past the man and get outside to call the police. He hadn't called while he was inside, just in case the man grabbed his phone. After my dad went outside, my grandma was able to follow, and the man quickly followed my grandma out as she was walking to the elevator. When the elevator came, the man went inside and went down. When the police showed up, they found the man on the bottom floor of the hotel, still pressing buttons in the open elevator, and they arrested him. My dad gave a statement, and the police said that he was probably on PCP, angel dust. When the rest of the family came back, my dad explained to them what had happened. Once we were able to get into the condo again, I noticed some blood on the wall, and my best friend said that she had seen a gash on the man's back earlier. That night we decided we'd had enough of this hotel, and packed up to go. My grandparents going back to Tennessee where they were from, and the rest of us going to Six Flags over Georgia, the amusement park. But right before we left, my grandpa decided to talk to the hotel manager to see what he had found out about the man. The manager said that the police had said that the man had already served 2 years in jail and had an extensive criminal record. I don't know what of. I'd guess something to do with drugs. I never found out the man's name, but I do know that he's still locked up at the monument, and they're trying to find something to do about him. Honestly, I just hope he gets help, maybe in rehab, but that we never meet again. My name is Deirdre. I'm an 18-year-old girl living in Ireland. I am originally from London and spent an early part of my childhood there. This is the story of the Enfield poltergeist. I am not one of those people involved in this history, but my grandmother lives in Enfield. I have many memories in Enfield, and I have been outside the house in question before. The Enfield poltergeist story is a story that sparks debate even today, being one of the most famous UK haunting cases. The Conjuring 2, which at the time I'm writing this hasn't quite been released yet, is based on the investigations of the case. Enfield is in an area of London, the capital of England, which is part of the UK. It is arguably a mixed area. It is about 9 3/4 of a mile from central London. It has areas where rich people live, where kids can play outside safely in the evening. However, other parts of Enfield, such as in Edmonton, are poor and deprived, and are high with crimes, from tragic stabbings to rapes. Enfield, in many ways, is just stereotypical North London. The Enfield poltergeist story takes place on Green Street, a working-class street in Enfield made up of council housing. It was a small semi-detached house. It was a perfectly ordinary brick house that shared a roof with the house beside it. It had 2 small upstairs windows, with a slightly large living room window. It was a very small house, definitely too small for a mom to live there with her 4 children and dogs. The family in this case was the Hodgson family, made up of a single parent, Peggy Hodgson, and children, Margaret, age 13, Janet, age 11, Johnny, age 10, and Billy, age 7. The story started in the summer of August 1977. Peggy called the police to her rented home in Enfield after 2 of her 4 children claimed that furniture was moving and knocking sounds were heard on the walls. At first she went to her neighbors for help, who weren't able to calm the family down, and when the neighbor, Vic Nottingham, a builder, came into the house, the poltergeist scared him so much that he scarpered. A female police constable was called out, and in her police notes, she recorded that she saw a chair being pushed by itself. The police, however, were not able to help the family, as they could not find any proof that someone was breaking the law. Events in the family started to escalate, with demonic noises being heard, loud noises, thrown Legos and toys, overturned chairs, and most famously, the levitation of the children. As events started to escalate even further, with no sign of help, Peggy and her neighbors did what was a last resort and went to the press. At this point, the Society for Physical Research got involved, and an investigation on the suspected poltergeist activity started. Investigators Maureen Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair were the main investigators of the case. Most of the activity was centered on 11-year-old Janet, whom many suspect that the poltergeists were attracted to due to the energy she was giving off as a prepubescent child about to enter puberty. She went into violent trances, and family members and witnesses from outside the house claimed to have seen her levitating, floating clean across the room. Janet was also used as a body, which the poltergeist could channel through, which would go on for hours speaking in a raspy old man's voice. Larynx experts said it was impossible for a young girl, even if faking, to keep this voice up for such an extraordinary length of time without getting a sore throat. The poltergeist was suspected to be a former occupant of the Enfield house, Bill Wilkins. He was a foul-mouthed, grumpy old man who had died many years in the property before. In recordings that can still be heard on audio tapes today, through Janet, he describes in graphic detail the moment of death.
Just before I went blind, and then had a hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in the chair in the corner downstairs.
When the situation in the house reached the press, his son came forward and contacted investigators to confirm that that was how his father died, and that the poltergeist sounded like his father. In tests, even when Janet had water put in her mouth, the voice came through. Janet, now aged 45, who now lives in Essex with her husband, a retired milkman, admitted that she and her sister had played with a Ouija board before all the activity flared up in the house. When the poltergeist was asked why didn't it leave the family alone, he responded that he wanted to see his family who had now left, and he wasn't a man of heaven. He frequently swore through Janet. It was difficult for researchers to document every single event in the case, as things were happening all the time. Janet, at one point, went into the hospital, and the activity significantly quieted down. Janet was subjected to a series of medical and psychiatric tests, but nothing was found to be wrong with her. Things in the house continued to escalate for a period of 14 months, with the investigators finding more and more weird occurrences happening in the house. Additionally, 2 independent eyewitnesses saw Janet levitating in her bedroom. Other things had happened, such as investigators being attacked with Lego, the dog being thrown down the stairs, plates being smashed, and doors opening by themselves. When the family went off for short holidays, Peggy's brother went to mine the house, but ran away from it in terror and refused to ever set foot in it again. Eventually, a vicar and a psychic visited the house, but nothing seemed to work, until a Dutch psychic visited the house. With the help of translation, he went up the stairs and stayed up there for a period of 20 minutes. He then came down the stairs and said something to the effect of, "It's gone now." This paired with the house blessings from a priest in 1978, and this seemed to significantly decrease the power of the poltergeist, but its presence wasn't fully gone. Its occurrences did not stop entirely, with Peggy continuing to hear noises in the house. After Peggy died of breast cancer in 2003, a while after, her son Johnny also died of cancer at age 14. Claire Bennett and her 4 sons moved into the house. She said in a newspaper interview, "I didn't see anything, but I felt uncomfortable. There was definitely some kind of presence in that house. I always felt like someone was looking at me." Her sons would wake her up in the night, hearing people talking downstairs. Claire then found out about the house's history. "Suddenly it all made sense," she said. They moved out after just 2 months. One of her sons, Shaka, 15, said, "The night before we moved out, I woke up and saw a man come into my room. I ran into my mom's room and said, 'We've got to move.' And we did the next day." The house is currently occupied by another family who do not wish to be identified. The mother says simply, "I've got children. They don't know about it. I don't want to scare them." The Enfield poltergeist has split people from all over the globe. Some point to the fact that the girls made up the events for attention. A couple of times, Janet and Margaret did try and trick the investigators, such as hiding the recorder and trying to pretend that the poltergeist took it. But they were too obvious, and these tricks were quickly foiled. Janet still maintains that all what her and her brothers and sisters experienced were paranormal. Whatever the skeptics may say, there were more than 30 credible witnesses to the strange events, including a policewoman, and the voice recordings recorded were inexplicable. The investigators themselves said that aside from a few tricks from the girls, 1 through 2%, everything else they investigated in the family was genuine. My uncle, who is from Enfield, had a friend who worked for the consul, who visited the house on a job. Working in London for the consul, he had pretty much been exposed to everything, and nothing fazed him. But he said that that house gave him the chills. One thing people should learn from this case is that Ouija boards should not be messed with. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to yourmaker6260@gmail.com. I want to give a really big thank you to Fear Urmaker for helping me out on this collaboration. It's always a pleasure to work with him, and it seems like I'm the only one he ever works with, which kind of works out, I guess. Make sure you head over to his channel to check out the other collaboration video we did. And I hope you all have a happy and safe Halloween, and I'll catch you in the next video.